Hello, everybody. Give everybody another minute or two to assemble, and then we'll get rolling. All right, we'll give it one more minute, and then we will get rolling. And they heard that and went and hid. Now she's back up. Ollie, Ollie, oxen free. She's not paying attention to me.
What are you muttering about?
Just saying terrible things to you, and you're not even listening to me.
I'm not.
All right. We can probably go ahead and get started, I think. Still a small group, but I wouldn't be surprised if people preferred the better weather right now, or just being on vacation because of the holiday, all of which are acceptable. So welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone had a lovely Memorial Day holiday. Hopefully got in some sunshine and the warmer weather, which was kind of nice. So I hope that was good. Thankfully, COVID did very kindly to us all while we were all gone on holiday, which was great. So for the first time since September 25th, we are now less than 1.5% positivity in all regions of New York State. We've had 57 days of a downward trend in rates of new infection across New York State. And the 7-day trend, the 7-day average is 0.65% across New York State at the moment. So those are all really positive developments. And in fact, even though we really, starting a month or so ago, started seeing a lot of unwinding of some of the masking requirements and some of the things that we kind of held our breath a little bit to see what effect that would have. Somewhere between vaccination, warmer weather, and good humors, things have turned in our favor to some degree. Interestingly so, the United States is somewhat on an island right now compared to many of the other nations that were seeing problems with COVID just a couple months ago when we were, and that places like India and the like are still seeing exponential rates of rise, where we're seeing this fairly rapid declination. So we've had a 90% drop in our daily positivity rate since January, and a 50% drop in the last 30 days. So that's pretty impressive when you look across the board. And this is really the lowest rate we've been in almost a year now, which is also good news. So much so that we're starting to see people pushing the envelope. Well, obviously, we're going to get these little case studies. So just this morning, the first hospital that I'm aware of in the country, which was in Texas, of course, decided to drop all masking requirements. So it is strongly encouraged that visitors mask, but it is no longer required that visitors mask in the hospital. That's going farther than probably even most, whereas even the CDC still says that you should be masking in a healthcare setting. So we're going to get these little case studies. We'll be able to see what the effect is. And obviously, we'll learn from that as we go forward. But a lot of this, we're kind of broaching new ground by the minute to some degree. Not that we year and a half, but we're just continuing down that path for the time being. So all seems to be good news as far as case rate. That decrease in case rate really seems to be across the Finger Lakes region. So that's also good, in that we've all decided to play together in the sandbox and all get better at the same time. For a while, we were all getting worse at the same time, and then several of us couldn't agree, and some counties were doing better while some were doing worse. We're now all trending in a good direction, which is good. So I think that's all to really say about the case rate at the moment. Couple things I want to say about testing. So everyone probably knows, we talked about it last time, the ambulatory testing, especially the pre-procedural testing and asymptomatic testing, has moved from the advancement facility on East River Road now over to Sawgrass, where it's been since last week, I think. So that information was all sent out last week, I think, in the email. They have had a very few stragglers who have shown up at the East River Road location, but it does seem that most folks have gotten that memo. At the same time that is happening, pretty much all ambulatory procedures are no longer requiring pre-procedural COVID testing. So if you're having to have anesthesia-based procedure surgery, that is still being required in most cases, but for all of the ambulatory office-based procedures, I think almost all of them have dropped those requirements at this time. Now, private practices are obviously able to do whatever they want. So if they continue to request, I would say we continue to follow suit with those requests for the time being. But the incidence of transmission in ambulatory settings was questionable even in the beginning. And now I think pretty definitively, now that we're at that rate where community transmission is theoretically almost non-existent, and it's really only small group clusters of outbreaks where we see that risk. I think that we're past the point where that's probably of any necessity at the moment, which is also good. So we're both seeing decreased need for testing pretty much across the Finger Lakes region, but also decreased rate of positivity at the same time, which is good. There is a couple of folks have reached out about this. There is a little bit of chatter that's starting to kick up around FDA approved rapid testing alternatives. These are becoming much more plentiful. They are becoming even probably ready to go to prime time home use. I know there's one that Costco is now selling that is not terribly cheap. I think it's like $129 for 10 tests. But several folks have reached out because it actually, I think, now carries an FDA approval. Those are still not able to do any return to anything level at this moment. So while they are potentially great if you're getting the family together and you wanted to test people because you have some unvaccinated kids and you want to know, is it okay to corral people who were potentially unvaccinated in a group setting? I've heard a lot of those questions. It will not buy you into anything, returning to work, returning to school, going to a Yankees game. It won't get you any of those things. So just know that they're there. They're still relatively expensive in the home use environment. I suspect we're going to see both more of them and lower costs. It remains to be seen if and when it will actually be readily accepted from any community access points per se. So more to come on that. The biggest conversation in the last week or two now has really been around the vaccination and specifically around myocarditis in adolescents. So I wanted to address that because several folks have reached out. Either, I say the two biggest groups have either been pediatricians or family practice who are worried about vaccinating and what they should be telling their patients, or it is one of us who have an adolescent who is worried about, should we continue vaccinating our adolescent children? So I keep telling everybody I would give it to my daughter in her eye tomorrow, and I gave it to her, not in her eye, but that was just because I was nice the first time. The second time, we'll see. Depends on how she's acting that day. So she is due for her second dose this weekend, and she is gonna get it. So I think the moral of the story remains the same of everything we've talked about, vaccination reactions to this point. The risk of COVID far, 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 far outweighs the risk of the vaccine. To date, there have been approximately 6 million 12 to 17-year-olds who have gotten the COVID vaccination. And from what I understand, there's somewhere around 18 reported cases nationwide of this myocarditis syndrome. The vast majority of those are very self-limited, usually only a couple of days in duration and very mild. The preponderance of data put out by the CDC and the AAP to date really show that it is more common in males than in females. It is more common in adolescents and young adults, and is more commonly seen after the second dose. So I think we're really talking about that 16 to 18, 16 to 20 something year olds, because most of our 12 to 17 year olds have not gotten their second dose at this point. So it is more common in males, is more common in the young adult, late adolescent stage. It is almost always self-limited and of minimal consequence and very mild in symptoms. The most common presentation to date has been mild chest discomfort, shortness of breath, or sometimes tachycardia, irregular palpitations. But it generally goes away on its own. They're recommending the same troponin EKG workup, consider echocardiogram if there's abnormalities. But I don't think it should substantively change our recommendations for vaccination, nor does it require any greater screening. Several folks have reached out and asked, should they be monitoring their adolescents who they administer the vaccine longer after the vaccine administration? The answer to that is definitely not. This is not a hypersensitivity reaction. It generally is in that first 4 days. Should the patients be brought back for any kind of empiric visit? I would definitely say no. The incidence is literally less than getting struck by lightning. So if you would have the kids come back to the office to check if they've been struck by lightning, then we should consider it. But short of that, no. So everyone should get their vaccine as fast as humanly possible. But fortunately, I think the peace of mind, everyone has said, they're worried that this is going to dissuade those who were vaccine hesitant from pursuing it. And we have absolutely seen that from all corners of society that said they're going to wait on vaccinating their adolescents until this plays out a little bit further. But I think it's the very nature that this gets caught so fast and identified and reviewed so quickly that should be providing reassurance to people that this is being monitored probably more closely than any vaccination effort in history. And so if we're going to find something, the rate of vaccination is steady and not dropping for the first time and still relatively high across the country. So if there's going to be an episode of something that we need to know, we're getting a case test of millions of people getting this vaccine. And I think even in adolescents, it's something like 250 to 300,000 every 4 days or 5 days to get vaccinated at this point. So it's a pretty good rate of test at this moment. So long story short, I just wanted to give everyone that reassurance that, the press is making an issue of it. I do think it's important that folks be educated, but I also think, it's obviously incumbent upon us to share that the true incidence of this is both extremely mild, extraordinarily rare, and really should have no bearing on vaccination decision making. So happy to talk about that more, but hopefully that is a nutshell answer to what several folks have reached out about in the past few days. Couple other things that I want to make mention of. We've talked about it before. It is probably truer now than ever. No matter where your patient is or what their situation is, they can get vaccinated at this moment. So almost every EMS crew across the region is now offering to do in-home vaccination for the homebound. There are subgroups that are going out and doing that as well. The county is doing a yeoman's job of vaccine sharing to primary care practices who are interested and willing. You can still order through the state, although many have reached out and said it's easier to go through the county than it is to order your minimum dose number of vials from the state, which makes every bit of sense. So I think while the availability of the vaccine is increasing, the other thing that I think is a very positive for all of us is that more and more those who have expressed vaccine hesitancy, as much as 70% of the time, say they would be willing to reconsider getting vaccinated if their primary care physician recommends it to them. So if you are talking about this with your patients, and even better, if you're doing this in your office, I think that is going to go farther to overcoming vaccine hesitancy than any of this other effort that we are ongoing right now. That's where most of the success is coming from, and that hesitant population. So thank you to all of you who are. I realize that there are just real barriers in some cases, in some practices. It's just not possible. But as Renee had put out previously, if it's a workforce issue, Kim Povic and the team at the hub have United Way volunteers who are medical professionals who are willing to help. If it's access to the vaccine and storage, the county has been willing to help. There's almost a lifeline to almost any barrier that your practice may experience. So as much as humanly possible, we're trying to make this foolproof and lift proof for your practice to be able to do that and offer it to your population if you think that would be of value. So certainly reach out to us if you're even on the fence, because it's probably a worthwhile consideration and discussion to have. That was pretty rapid fire for my COVID stuff. I'm going to split into one update that's kind of AHP business. So we have our clinical grand rounds that's coming up on June 17th. That is going to be a little bit different for us because we're going to talk about things that are not COVID for the first time in maybe 18 months, which I don't even know how to talk about things that don't have the word COVID in it. But nonetheless, you may go an entire AHP meeting and not hear about COVID, which will be magical. So we're going to do that on the 17th. We're going to introduce all of our kind of back to healthcare efforts that we have planned for this year. And then I want to go ahead and put out a save the date plan because on June 24th, to follow up that discussion on the 17th, we have time set aside. So we're going to be introducing our new large joint osteoarthritis pathway. So just teaser for the 58 of you on the call right now. We're seeing about 30% of our large joint replacements that leak out of AHP network every year. When that happens, it costs us about $4,000 more per joint replacement than if it's done in network. For those patients that get done out of network, they are both more likely to have to go to rehab and more likely to be reoperated on in the next 5 years and or readmitted after that hospitalization. So there's both a value-based savings, a patient outcomes, and a revenue source to keep it inside of our network with our affiliate hospitals. So we've developed this fairly slick osteoarthritis pathway with conservative management by this non-operative team within orthopedics that we're going to be introducing on the 17th. And then we have set aside a time at 6 p.m. on the 24th for any of our primary care practices who are interested in having a one-on-one discussion and or meet and greet with the orthopedics who will be doing the non-operative care. If you want to learn more about it or get the chance to ask the burning questions that we don't have time to cover on the 17th, they're going to make themselves available on the 24th at 6 p.m. So go ahead and hold that time if you are so inclined. And hopefully we can have a robust discussion in both of those about our kind of return to business efforts in the coming days. With that, I think I've covered everything I want to talk about. So LJ, anything you want to cover?
Wow, that was extraordinarily comprehensive. I would just say 3 things. I'm going in reverse order from what Chad did. This is the Grand Rounds coming up is very adult centric. And just for those of you who are a little more pediatric focused, there will be a pediatric centric AHP Grand Rounds in the fall. You are welcome to attend, obviously, the Grand Rounds in June as well. But just to let people know, we've decided to kind of split this up. It made the most sense in order to be able to really feature the number of different things we're doing, both in the pediatric and the adult space. The second thing would be just a shout out again, like Chad did, to all of you who have managed to stand up COVID vaccination in your practice. It's actually incredibly remarkable how quickly everyone has done this. And just to point out again, it's about vaccinating now, but this really is about developing the workflows and the processes so that COVID vaccination boosters and other things can really become, part and parcel of primary care the way other vaccines are. So thank you to all of you. And of course, the County Health Department and Kim Povic, who really helped to do that. And then the last thing is I am channeling back to the myocarditis potential after COVID vaccine. I'm channeling my inner pediatric cardiologist, which I am not, but I did get a message from George Porter. And if George was here right now, or others from the pediatric cardiology team were here, they would say, yeah, what he said. Chad's comments around this are spot on. They are not seeing any increase in cases of true myocarditis here anyway, locally at this point. They recommend, as the CDC does, that youth should be vaccinated. This is not a risk that's considered a deterrent to vaccination, because the rates are really not any higher than that of the general population. And George did ask me to remind everyone, if you do have a patient who presents, regardless of whether they've had their COVID vaccine or it's post-COVID, but if they're presenting with signs of myocarditis, what Chad said, chest pain, palpitations, shortness of breath, or fatigue, that's not explained by another diagnosis, start your workup and refer to them, and they are ready to accept those patients. And that's it. You really covered it all. I just got a chance to boom, hit it all one more time. Thanks.
That works. Renee?
Just pediatric PCP tonight, 7:00 for pediatricians on the call.
Perfect. There we go. So a couple of the quick things. So right before we went live, Renee had sent out a note from Washington Post. It's also been circulating. I think at least one other person has actually asked me about this, about inadequate immune response or antibody response to vaccination in certain subgroups of the population. So it does appear true that those who are immunosuppressed, so transplant patients, patients who have blood-borne cancers, who are on aggressive chemotherapy treatments, they are as much as maybe half or more of those patients are not showing adequate antibody responses. There is a lot of discussion ongoing. There's actually a physician, I don't remember what kind of physician he was, but he is a heart transplant recipient. He got 2 doses of vaccine and had almost no antibody response, petitioned and was able to successfully get a 3rd dose of the vaccine and mounted a normal antibody response to what non-immunosuppressed individuals were. So obviously that's an N of 1. There is now discussion about whether a more rapid booster or a 3-dose series may in fact be the secret sauce for these immunosuppressed individuals, but there is no guidance as to that at this moment. There is likewise no guidance that any particular subgroup should have antibody testing performed to see if they're having an adequate immune response. And there's even, making this more complicated, what we still don't know is it purely antibody, or is it this humoral cellular immunity that is adequate in and of itself? And so that maybe a loss of antibody response is okay because the cellular immunity is sufficient in and of itself. That's way more immunology than I had room to stuff in my head during first year of medical school, so it all fell out. But I can tell you that there is a pretty good thought now that we are all protected at least for 12 months. And there is active discussion about booster. In fact, there are boosters that are already in development that they anticipate that they will have ready likely by fall, long before anyone would need it. But for some of these subgroups, they may be the first to receive a booster shot. And then that would parlay over into the rest of us starting in roughly December, when the first doses of vaccine started going out. So there will be that follow-up. Your Excelsior Pass should be able to be renewed 6 months after the initial. Several folks have seemingly discovered the Excelsior Pass or wanted to go to a Yankees game or something and realized they needed the Excelsior Pass. So yes, if you are 5 months and 30 days status post your second dose, your Excelsior Pass will in fact have an expiration date that will be coming in the next couple of days. However, you can just reapply for an Excelsior Pass again, and it will cover you for another 6 months' time, is what the word on the street is. I'm still not due for several weeks, so I can't speak to that definitively, but that's what I understand to be the case. So those are just some issues I wanted to raise that LJ's discussion and Renee's thing that she sent out made me think of. So with that,
I just renewed my Excelsior Pass and it came in with an expiration date of February 2nd, 2022. So even better than 6 months.
wow, okay, there you go. On a roll. Okay. Maybe I should renew now. Get it in while you can. Any questions? I don't see anything in the chat. Any questions that anybody has, or any issues that we did not cover? All right, hearing none. We will call it a day and give you 21 minutes of your life back. So thank you guys again. Thank you all for being rock stars of the vaccination effort. You have no idea how big of a difference that has made. Even for those who aren't able to vaccinate, just the fact that the primary care community has stepped up has obviously introduced a lot of cachet for the vaccine hesitant, that they realize that it is something the medical community is kind of in force supporting. So thank you for that. I think it's made a huge difference in the vaccine rates, even in communities where it is not as supported, and keep stabbing adolescents at an alarming rate because it's good for them. And I will be taking part in stabbing my adolescent for the second time in just a couple of days' time, and maybe with a syringe.
This is when we wish that we could do like a bleep thing, you know, when you're talking, you are not channeling your inner pediatrician. I can just tell you that right now. Oh my God.
Something about that was right.
And with that,
all right, guys. Thank you guys so much, and we will talk again soon.
bye everybody.